The broadcast echoed across the galactic network, its deep, guttural tones vibrating to the speakers of every vessel, station, and colony within the Council's reach. King Zorcal of the Zorvith Empire stood in the center of the transmission, his imposing frame draped in ceremonial battle armor, his four crimson eyes gleaming with disdain. The Zorvith were a race built for conquest, their empire stretching across 100 worlds, their history a relentless march of victories over lesser species. And now, they had chosen their next target. Humans, Zorcal growled, his voice reverberating like thunder. Your defiance is noted. Your arrogance will be corrected. You will kneel before the Zorvith Empire, or you will be erased. It was not the first time a species had heard such words from the Zorvith. In the past, the outcome had always been the same: swift, brutal domination. The Galactic Council, a neutral governing body overseeing interstellar diplomacy, had pleaded for restraint, but their words carried little weight. They had seen empires rise and fall, and to them, humanity was just another footnote waiting to be written in the Zorvith's long history of conquest. On Earth, the message was received with neither panic nor submission. The days of fearing the unknown had long passed. Humanity had not spread across the stars as conquerors, but they had learned to survive against impossible odds. Unlike the Zorvith's past victims, they had spent centuries fighting amongst themselves, perfecting war in ways no alien race could comprehend. In a secured war room deep beneath Geneva, world leaders, military strategists, and AI analysts gathered. A holographic representation of Zorcal flickered before them, his words replaying one final time before the transmission was cut. "This is not a demand," said General Elias Carter, his voice steady. "It's a declaration of war." "The Council won't intervene," an advisor murmured. "They never do, and they expect us to fall." Carter's gaze swept across the room. "Then we prove them wrong." There was no lengthy debate, no attempt at diplomacy. Humanity had studied the Zorvith, analyzed their war doctrine, dissected their previous conquests. The enemy was powerful, but power alone was not enough. The Zorvith fought with overwhelming force, but they did not expect their prey to fight back with ingenuity, deception, and ruthlessness. As the Zorvith fleet gathered near the edge of human-controlled space, their first target became clear. Europa, a thriving colony and a strategic outpost for Earth's deep space operations. The attack was meant to be swift, a display of dominance to crush resistance before it began. But when the Zorvith warships descended, they found no welcoming defense fleet, no hurried evacuation. The colony was eerily silent. King Zorcal watched from the bridge of his flagship, his mandibles clicking in irritation. His generals assured him that this was typical of weaker species. The fear of annihilation often led to abandonment, but as his forces moved in to claim the surface, something was wrong. The once bustling settlement was deserted, yet infrastructure remained intact. Power grids still hummed. Machinery still ran. It was as if the humans had left in a hurry, except there were no signs of panic. The first explosion tore through the lead assault team before they could react. Automated turrets emerged from hidden compartments, tearing through Zorvith warriors with unerring precision. Energy barriers activated, trapping invaders in choke points, forcing them into carefully laid kill zones. The humans had not abandoned Europa. They had turned it into a trap. What followed was not a battle, but a massacre. Every street, every corridor, every open space was a carefully orchestrated death trap. Drones swarmed like metallic wasps, striking with coordinated efficiency. AI-controlled railguns, hidden beneath layers of ice, fired upon Zorvith landing craft with pinpoint accuracy. Biological agents tailored to Zorvith physiology had been released into the air, inducing hallucinations, confusion, and slow paralysis. Zorcal's general sent frantic reports. The invasion force was being decimated, their superior numbers meaningless against an enemy that refused to fight on their terms. In the span of hours, what was supposed to be an effortless victory had become a devastating defeat. From Earth, the counterattack had already begun. While the Zorvith fleet remained distracted at Europa, human stealth ships slipped past their defenses, infiltrating deep into enemy territory. Cyber warfare teams deployed AI-driven viruses, crippling Zorvith communication networks. Supply lines were disrupted. The Zorvith, who had never known war beyond direct confrontation, were now fighting an invisible enemy that struck from shadows. For the first time in recorded history, the Zorvith Empire was losing. Zorkal's claws dug into the metal railing of his command bridge, his mind racing. This was not how it was supposed to go. The Zorvith had crushed civilizations older and stronger than these hairless primates. Yet here he was, watching his forces disintegrate before his eyes. His fury boiled over. He would not allow this humiliation to stand. If Europa had been a miscalculation, then Earth itself would burn. He would assemble the full might of the Zorvith Empire, a fleet so vast that no amount of human cunning could stop it. Even if he had to reduce every human world to cinders, he would make an example of them. With a snarl, he turned to his fleet commanders. "Prepare the armada. We end this." Humanity had won the first battle, but the war was far from over. The Zorvith armada surged through the void, a relentless tide of warships blotting out the distant stars. Tens of thousands of vessels, from city-sized dreadnoughts to sleek hunter-class interceptors, advanced toward Earth, their engines burning with the fury of an empire scorned. King Zorkal stood at the heart of it all, his crimson eyes locked onto the holographic projection of his target. The humans had humiliated him at Europa. They had turned his warriors into prey, reduced his forces to whispers of their former might. That failure would not be repeated. Across the void, humanity watched and waited. Earth's defense grid hummed with silent readiness, orbital platforms standing like sentinels against the inevitable storm. Fleets of human warships, smaller but faster, lay in ambush behind the barren rock of Luna and within the asteroid fields beyond Mars. But as the Zorvith pressed forward, confident in their overwhelming numbers, they failed to realize they were already at war with an enemy they could not see. The first sign of disaster came not from a battlefield, but from within the Empire itself. As the Zorvith fleet neared Earth, their homeworld descended into chaos. Entire planetary defense networks flickered and died. Supply lines collapsed. Communication relays were hijacked, their encrypted channels now whispering only static. The Empire's vast war machine, once an unstoppable force of conquest, had been dismantled without a single human soldier setting foot within its borders. At the heart of this unseen war was Captain Elias Carter, leading a clandestine force embedded deep within the Zorvith capital. While the enemy had prepared for an open conflict, humanity had rewritten the rules of engagement. A fleet might take a world, but a well-placed algorithm could conquer an empire. Across Zorvith Prime, Carter's operatives worked in the shadows. AI-driven viruses devoured critical data infrastructures, rerouting supply chains into the void. Zorvith outposts, unable to communicate with their command, fell into confusion and disarray. Automated factories, once churning out warships and weapons, now stood silent, their blueprints rewritten to manufacture useless scrap. The Empire's strength had never been its warriors, but its war engine, and humanity had turned that engine to rust. As the invasion fleet pushed forward, Zorkal felt the first hints of unease. Reports from the homeworld were sporadic, conflicting. He had ordered reinforcements to be sent, but none had arrived. It made no sense. The Empire had never suffered internal collapse before. His generals assured him that the fleet was unstoppable, that the humans were merely buying time. But Zorkal, despite his rage, knew the scent of desperation when he smelled it. Then the first human strike hit, not from Earth, but from within his own ranks. Stealth ships, invisible to the Empire's outdated scanners, emerged like specters in the dark. Their payload was not conventional weaponry, but precision sabotage, targeting life support systems, ammunition caches, and reactor cores. The first wave of human infiltrators crippled ships before their crews even knew they were under attack. Artificial gravity flickered and failed on a dozen capital ships, sending soldiers and officers spiraling into the void. Engines detonated from within, tearing apart entire battle formations in an instant. Panic spread through the Zorvith ranks. The Armada, once a unified force, fractured as individual commanders broke formation, trying to regroup, trying to understand what had gone so terribly wrong. And then, when the fleet was at its most vulnerable, humanity struck in full. From the shadow of the moon, Earth's fleet emerged in a coordinated counteroffensive. Smaller, faster, and armed with weapons designed to tear through Zorvith hulls like paper, the human ships weaved between the confused alien forces, cutting through their ranks with ruthless precision. Railgun slugs, moving at relativistic speeds, punched through armor plating. Hypersonic missiles delivered EMP bursts that left Zorvith warships defenseless, drifting like carcasses in space. Zorcal roared in fury as the tide of battle shifted before his eyes. His empire had built itself on brute force, on the simple strategy of overwhelming any opponent with sheer numbers. But now, for the first time, he saw what it meant to fight a species that did not rely on strength alone. The humans had studied the Zorvith, dissected their tactics, unraveled their weaknesses. Every maneuver he ordered was countered before it could be executed. Every advantage was rendered meaningless. And then the final blow came, not from the battlefield, but from his homeworld. Zorvith Prime had fallen. The transmission cut through the command channels, overriding all other signals. Zorcal turned to holoscreen, his breath stilling as he saw the impossible. The Grand Palace, the seat of his rule for generations, stood in ruins. His own people, once unwavering in their loyalty, now flooded the streets in rebellion. His elite guards, stripped of their power, lay dead in the halls of his throne room, and standing in the wreckage of his empire, staring into the very screen that broadcasted his fleet, was a single human soldier. Elias Carter met the Zorvith King's gaze through the transmission, his expression unreadable. And then, without a word, he raised a single hand and dragged his thumb across his throat. The message was clear. Zorcal's reign was over. His empire was gone, and there would be no escape. His warlords, witnessing the fall of their homeworld in real time, turned on each other. Some broke rank, retreating into deep space, hoping to salvage whatever fragments of power they could. Others surrendered, realizing the futility of further resistance. The armada disintegrated, not from firepower, but from despair. And as the command bridge erupted into chaos, as his generals fell into a frenzy of infighting and betrayal, Zorcal felt something he had never known before. Fear. For the first time in his existence, he was the prey. The streets of Zorvith Prime pulsed with an eerie silence. Fires still smoldered in the ruins of the Grand Palace. The scent of scorched metal and death thick in the air. The towering statues of past Zorvith rulers, once symbols of dominance, lay shattered beneath the weight of rebellion. For the first time in recorded history, the Zorvith people were without a king, but their king was not dead. Zorcal knelt in the dust, his massive frame bound in reinforced titanium shackles, his once gleaming armor stripped away, leaving only the tattered remnants of his royal garb. His 4 crimson eyes, once burning with contempt, now darted between the gathered masses, searching for anything, any remnant of power, any sign of loyalty among his people. He found none. The humans had made sure of that. A procession had formed, stretching from the ruins of the palace to the heart of the capital. The same streets where Zorcal's armies had once paraded in victory were now lined with his own people, their expressions unreadable. Some still held fear in their gazes. Others barely concealed their quiet satisfaction. The mighty warlord, the architect of 1,000 conquests, was now nothing more than a prisoner. Elias Carter stood at the front of the procession, his stance relaxed but his presence undeniable. His black combat suit bore no insignia, no mark of rank or nation. Humanity stood here not as a divided world, but as a singular force. He studied the fallen king, but there was no hatred in his expression, no smug satisfaction, only purpose. "This is how it ends," Carter said, his voice carrying through the open square. The words cut deeper than any weapon. Zorcal bared his teeth in a snarl, but there was no real defiance left in him. He had lost the right to rage. The humans had debated what to do with the fallen king. Some had argued for execution, a swift and brutal reminder of what happened to those who threatened Earth. Others suggested imprisonment, a slow decay in the darkness of a human-controlled cell, stripped of all dignity. But neither of those punishments would deliver the message humanity needed to send. No, Zorcal would not die a warrior's death. He would suffer as humanity's enemies had suffered. He would feel the weight of helplessness. And so, the dragging began. The chains tightened as soldiers stepped forward, gripping the bindings fastened around the former king's wrists. Zorkal's body lurched forward, his knees scraping against the cracked pavement. He roared, a deep, guttural sound of rage and humiliation, but there was no mercy in his captor's eyes. The humans moved through the streets with a slow, deliberate pace. Zorkal, forced to stumble behind them, felt every scrape of stone against his flesh, every cut from the debris-littered ground. His body, built for war, for towering above lesser beings, was reduced to something pitiful, hauled through the city like a captured beast. The broadcast fed the entire galaxy. The fall of Zorkal, the death of his empire, the consequences of waging war against humanity, all of it unfolded in real time. Alien species, once fearful of the Zorvith, now watched as their tormentor was dragged before his own people. Some recoiled in horror, others leaned closer, intrigued, perhaps even impressed. And the Zorvith? They said nothing. There were no cries for mercy, no demands for their king's release. The citizens lined the streets, watching in silence as their ruler was paraded like a trophy. Some averted their gazes, unwilling to witness what had become of their once great leader. Others stood motionless, their faces blank. But there were those, fewer, but noticeable, who watched with quiet satisfaction. A species bred for war had never known what it meant to lose. Now they understood. Zorkal's breathing grew ragged. His muscles burned. His pride festered like an open wound. He had spent his life conquering, standing above all others, dictating the fate of entire civilizations. Now, he was nothing more than a spectacle. As the procession reached the grand square, the chains loosened and his body collapsed onto stone. The city's central plaza stretched before him, a place where his voice had once commanded legions. Now, his name was whispered only as a cautionary tale. Carter stepped forward, his boots halting just inches from the fallen king. He crouched, meeting the Zorvita's gaze, studying the flickering emotions beneath those crimson eyes. Anger, desperation, and beneath it all, fear. "This is what happens," Carter said, his voice steady, "when you mistake restraint for weakness." Zorkal gritted his teeth, his throat rumbling with unspoken fury, but he did not respond. What could he say? The human commander rose, turning to the broadcast drone still hovering above. "Let this be known," he continued, addressing not just the Zorvith, but the entire galactic audience. "Humanity does not seek war. We do not expand. We do not conquer. But if you bring war to us," he gestured toward the broken king, "this is what awaits you." A ripple passed through the crowd, through the transmission waves that carried the message to every corner of the galaxy. The Zorvith were finished. Their empire, once built on fear, was now a shattered husk. And Earth, once viewed as an insignificant world on the fringes of civilization, had proven itself as something far more terrifying. The chains around Zorkal were unfastened, but it was not an act of mercy. He would not be granted the dignity of a swift execution or the release of death. His fate was now worse than either. A human-controlled prison awaited him, a place where the echoes of his past would haunt him in endless silence. The galaxy would move on, leaders would rise and fall, but Zorkal would remain forgotten in the depths of confinement. No legacy, no empire, just a cautionary tale. As the humans departed the ruined capital, as their fleet secured what remained of the Zorvita's shattered war machine, the broadcast cut to black. The message had been sent, and the galaxy had heard it loud and clear. The galaxy did not change overnight, but the echoes of Zorkal's downfall carried across the stars, shifting the delicate balance of power in ways no one had foreseen. The Zorvith Empire, once feared as an unstoppable force of conquest, had crumbled in a matter of weeks. Their war machine lay in ruins, their fleet scattered, their homeworld under occupation. But it was not conquest that humanity sought. It was control. The Galactic Council, once dismissive of Earth's place among the stars, now watched humanity with wary eyes. The same species they had overlooked, the ones they had expected to be just another victim in a long history of imperial dominance, had proven themselves something far more dangerous. Humanity had not just survived. They had dismantled one of the most feared empires in the known universe with an efficiency that sent ripples through every major power. Elias Carter stood aboard the UHS Vanguard, watching the feed from the Galactic Council's emergency assembly. Representatives from 100 species argued in urgent, hushed tones, their voices a chorus of concern and barely restrained fear. They debated what should be done about humanity, whether Earth should be sanctioned, whether their sudden rise to prominence should be contained before it spiraled out of control. But there was no consensus, only uncertainty. The Council had always been built upon an unspoken hierarchy. Older, stronger species dictated the flow of galactic politics, while weaker civilizations learned to accept their place. Humanity had shattered that system. They had shown that brute force meant nothing against strategy, against adaptability, against the kind of ruthless pragmatism that had allowed them to thrive against impossible odds. A transmission request flickered across Carter's screen. The caller ID was encrypted, but he already knew who it was. He accepted it, and the weathered face of Admiral Rachel Iwate appeared before him. The commander of Earth's defense forces had aged gracefully, her sharp gaze as calculating as ever. "They're afraid of us," she said without preamble. "They should be," Carter replied. Iwata exhaled through her nose, her fingers steepled beneath her chin. "We're at a crossroads. The Council can't ignore us anymore, but they won't welcome us either. Some want an alliance. Others want to contain us before we get too powerful." Carter leaned back in his chair, considering, what's the official position? Iwata's lips quirked upward, a shadow of a smile. "We let them stew. It was the right move. Humanity had no need to rush into alliances or seek the approval of an institution that had never cared for their survival. The Zorvatha's destruction had already cemented Earth's reputation. They were no longer a species to be ignored. The question now was what they would do with that power. The answer revealed itself soon enough. In the months following the Zorvatha's collapse, smaller species, those who had lived in the shadow of conquest, those who had suffered under the rule of stronger empires, began reaching out to Earth. They did not seek protection in the traditional sense. They did not beg for armies or weapons. What they sought was knowledge. Humanity had done something no one else had managed. They had defied an empire and survived. And in doing so, they had revealed the greatest truth of all. The old rules no longer applied. Carter met with leaders of a dozen alien races, each wary, each uncertain of what it meant to stand in the presence of a species that had undone a tyrant. Some spoke of independence, of breaking free from the powers that had kept them subjugated for centuries. Others spoke of fear, of what might come next if another empire rose to take the Zorvatha's place. "Empires fall," Carter told them, his voice steady. "The only thing that matters is what you build in their place." And so, humanity did what no one had expected. They did not seize territory. They did not demand tribute. They did not carve out an empire in the ruins of their enemy. Instead, they gave others the tools to fight for themselves. Earth's intelligence networks provided strategic knowledge to those who had once been powerless. They taught species how to resist occupation, how to disrupt the supply chains of oppressors, how to wage wars not with numbers, but with ideas. Encryption methods, stealth tactics, unconventional warfare, all the things that had allowed humanity to survive against a superior force were now shared with those who needed them. The galaxy began to shift. Small uprisings turned into full-scale rebellions. Old empires, once comfortable in their power, found themselves facing resistance they had never anticipated. The Council watched in uneasy silence as the balance of power slipped further and further from their grasp. Humanity had not become conquerors. They had become something far more dangerous. They had become the catalyst for change. As Carter watched the stars beyond the viewport, he knew there would be consequences. Earth had played its hand, and now the galaxy would react. Some would seek alliance, others would seek vengeance. There would be wars yet to come, new enemies who would test humanity's strength. But this time, Earth would not face them alone. For the first time in galactic history, the oppressed had been given a choice, and the age of empires was coming to an end.